Vanguard. One of the companies that collectively manages $17 trillion of assets, which represents roughly a third of the entire US stock market capitalization. But the question is, who is the man behind this behemoth? Because Vanguard knows you, but here's your chance to meet him. On May 8, 1929, John, nicknamed Jack Bogle, was born. Jack's father, a war vet, after the return from war, worked and provided well for the family. They lived a comfortable life. Though this would only be for a time, as the Great Depression would soon settle in. The stock market had now collapsed, affecting every single American and their family. Not excluded from this list are the Bogles, experiencing disastrous effects. The inheritance is wiped out, the house is now needed to be sold, and Jack, now growing up in these conditions as the Depression decade lived on, realized that his family was penniless. As a result of this, Jack developed financial insecurity over his family's situation. Growing up, this feeling was ingrained in him. He found a weakness in being financially unstable and figured that there is power found in money. He decided for himself right then that he would restore the Bogle family name and help his parents regain financial security and seek power in the form of money. In order to begin this journey, he started young, beginning work at the age of 10. His parents' financial losses turned him into a driven young man.
I was born into a family that had considerable wealth, but it all vanished, literally went to zero by about 1932 or 1933. So we were on our own, and we had to make do with what we could. We had to, again, as we got a little bit older, had to earn what if you wanted something, you went out and earned the money to get it. And we lived with our grandparents for a few years. That was not atypical of those Depression years. And so I tell people I grew up in the most ideal possible way, as without any money, with a certain standing in the community as a result of our family background. And that's really, it's perfect. Once you learn to take responsibility early, you have to, you don't have any choice, not some magical thing, and stand up for yourself, knowing if you want something, you've got to work for it, knowing you've got to contribute to the family exchequer. And so you start working when you're 8 or 9, delivering newspapers and magazines.
Though Jack knew that he couldn't achieve this alone. Not only did he need a prestigious education, but he needed someone to look up to. Luckily for him, Jack's first example of a successful businessman was his grandfather, who founded American Brick Corporation, an American can company which later would become Primerica. Looking up to his grandfather, he knew that if he wanted to achieve his goals, hard work and determination is needed, and he had a prime example right in front of him. Then, he knew that he also needed a prestigious education, and the odds were in his favor as his uncle was able to arrange Jack and his twin brother to attend Blair Academy. Blair Academy was a boarding school where wake-up call was at 6 a.m., the boys went to classes, and then worked part-time jobs and completed their homework by 10 p.m. Jack Bogle excelled in all of his classes. Though he had a special passion for numbers, he ended up graduating top of his class. However, he lost by a point to become class valedictorian. Jack was devastated. This to him felt like a complete defeat. He begged his teachers to reconsider, but they didn't. Regardless, Bogle had to move on. Now came an important part of Jack's life. Pursuing his goals, he knew that he had to attend a college. Though by this point, his father had become a heavy drinker, losing his job, so the financial burden fell solely on his mother. As a result of this, only one of the three brothers could attend post-secondary, while the two started to work to provide for the family. It was the general consensus that Jack would be the one to attend college, and this left Jack Bogle with even more guilt and motivation, more determined that nothing should interfere with his success. Bogle set out for Princeton University. With the help of scholarships and him working, he would be able to afford to attend the school. Later on, Bogle ended up graduating, though he didn't achieve being top of his class, as a lot of his time was spent working, trying to make money. After graduating Princeton in 1951, Jack Bogle set out his career options to banking or investing, and luckily for him, things seemed to be working out as he had offers from Philadelphia National Bank and Benning & Co. Though another third offer provided an interesting situation. After being referred by a friend, Jack Bogle found himself in front of an opportunity to work at Wellington Management. Being interviewed by two men from the company, they were surprised by the gravity of his knowledge on the fund business, as Jack wrote his final thesis on the topic. Offering him a job at the firm, Bogle debated accepting the position. At the time, the fund industry was small, and working at a bank seemed old-fashioned. His childhood experiences of growing up during the Depression stressed him out tremendously. Not knowing what would be the right decision, he just knew that no matter what, he refused to experience what he went through during the Depression again. Despite these fears, Jack Bogle had a gift. He had the ability to see the opportunity in things, and despite being unsure, he took the Wellington job. The problem was that not only was the mutual fund industry in the 1950s small, but it also experienced a shakeout as well. Many firms did not survive, causing immense stress on everyone in the business. Bogle, thinking of his family, knew that he had to keep fighting. He worked hard, he was intelligent, but still, senior management did not take notice of him. For months, Bogle did the calculations, being responsible for calculating the average cost of each investment held by Wellington Fund. Though his work spoke for itself, since after months of doing this work, Bogle was promoted to now help Walter Morgan, the founder of Wellington Fund, write fund reports corresponding with shareholders. 2 years later, Bogle managed to become the PR voice for the company, speaking to sales representatives or industry groups, usually in the defense of balanced funds. Jack knew that no matter what, he must keep putting in the work to help his family, and this then landed him the role of becoming official assistant to Walter Morgan. Bogle held this position for the next 7 years. Walter was a very tough boss, though he did allow Jack to have his independence. Learning the business from the inside out, Jack took some remarks on how the business was done. He thought that a new investment strategy would be beneficial, and by the late 1950s, he had gained enough self-confidence to persuade Morgan to adopt a new strategy. Bogle believed that although the strategy was proven to work in the past, now, balanced funds were losing their attraction. He suggested that the Wellington branched out and introduced new funds. Though this would not be an easy persuasion, this decision was risky, but Jack was determined on getting his point across. The industry was changing, and Jack needed others to see this. To get his point across, he wrote a business plan for Wellington. Jack heard all the objections to change over and over again. But he also heard dealers and investors pressuring Morgan to create a stock fund. By 1958, Bogle was persuaded that action was warranted, and he recommended to Morgan that Wellington should support a pure equity fund. After much persistence, Bogle was granted Morgan's blessing. A major turning point in Jack's Wellington Management Company career was the establishment of the new fund. Jack had taken a risk and achieved success, and now Morgan was informing others that he was headed towards becoming the company's leader soon. In the meantime, Jack received his first fund officer title, Secretary of the Wellington Equity Fund, as a result of the establishment of the new fund. However, leading a revolution was not all fame and glory. Many had doubts about how the fund would go, but in fact, it actually got off to a good start. But when the 60s arrived, it took a darker turn. The start of the Wellington Equity Fund in 1958 didn't significantly enhance the company's financial performance. Despite its promising start in the initial 3 years, the new fund encountered a crisis in 1962, requiring the replacement of the portfolio manager. The only notable response to the Wellington Equity Fund was several Wellington Fund shareholders who sued, alleging unfair capitalization on the Wellington name. Although Wellington Management Company surpassed $2 billion in assets under management in 1965, sales of its fund shares declined in both 1965 and 1966. To address this decline, the company hired one after the other portfolio managers, yet investment performance remained subpar, leading to the further decrease in fund shares. Jack Bogle knew that this was on his shoulders. His very own idea was costing the company. He couldn't risk going back to the way his life used to be. His family sacrificed for him to go to college, and years of hard work had led to this moment. He refused to go out on a low. Strategizing, Bogle decided that he had one option left: a merger. A merger could save it all. During a lunch with John C. Jansen, Bogle mentioned casually that the Wellington Management Company was facing challenges and he aimed to acquire a firm with a strong investment talent and a high-performing fund. Jansen suggested a group of investment advisors in Boston who might be suitable. Despite Bogle's disdain for the term hot fund, he became intrigued when Jansen mentioned the Ivis Fund, which had been the top-performing fund for the previous 5 years. Yet it was relatively unknown to most investors. Managed by Thorndike, Doran, Payne & Lewis Incorporation, the Ivis Fund had seen remarkable success, boasting aggressive investment strategies and substantial growth in asset under management. Recognizing potential synergies with the Wellington management, Bogle initiated merger discussions with TDP&L in late 1965. Bogle found himself in a fortunate position during negotiations that could potentially diversify Wellington management assets and save the company. Negotiations continued. They were going well. And by June 6, 1966, there was an agreement with no downsides on either side. After the merger was completed, it was agreed that Jack Bogle would become president and the CEO as Walter stepped aside. Walter had anticipated this day and planned that Jack Bogle would eventually become his successor, and this seemed like the perfect opportunity. Jack Bogle had achieved it all. Though things were too good to be true. Over time, Bogle's respect for the Boston Group diminished as he felt that they lacked understanding of the business compared to him. While he could have accepted their aggressive investment strategies if they had been successful, it became clear that their disagreements had turned into open hostility. This discord extended to the Wellington Management's board of directors, which was heavily influenced by the Boston Group. Bogle described it as a power struggle where both sides sought control. The escalating tensions caused concern among junior employees at Wellington, who feared being forced to pick sides, risking their jobs. Bogle's assistant at the time witnessed this firsthand during his business trip to Paris. When he returned 3 years later, the situation had worsened, with internal conflicts intensifying. By late 1970, despite some financial improvements, the friction between Bogle and the Boston Group had heightened. In 1969, the funds experienced a net cash outflow of $50 million, marking the first year of negative cash flow in the Wellington Management Company's history. Despite the worsening situation, Bogle struggled to take Duran and Thorndike seriously. He remained convinced of his own correctness and believed that they would eventually back down. He knew that this merger was his responsibility, and when he had a meeting with the Boston Group, they asked him to resign. He was presented two options: leave Wellington entirely or step down from management but remain in a clerical role at the funds. Bogle had to choose whether to give in or stand his ground, and he intended to fight. Though the odds were stacking against him, slowly his firing kept coming up as a topic. The two work cultures would not merge, and the Boston Group managed to gain more support and began working towards trying to squeeze out Jack Bogle. In the final board meeting on January 23, 1974, once again this war continued, and finally came the question: Mr. Bogle, will you resign? Jack Bogle stood his ground and he said no. After a board vote, the board decided to fire Mr. Jack Bogle.
So he said, do whatever it takes to fix this company, which happened to be at that time publicly held. So I had an obligation to Mr. Morgan to maximize the value of that investment. And I don't want to deflect any blame on anybody but myself. It was my decision to do this merger with a firm that did three things: brought us in new managers, Wellington Fund was faltering, brought us in a go-go fund called iVest Fund, and brought us into the pension management business. It was a small firm, very small firm. It was often said that the mouse would swallow the elephant at this time. But I had confidence that these four partners, would be eternally good managers. There is no such thing. Everybody comes and goes. And reversion to the mean.
In disbelief at what has been done to him, Jack Bogle knew that he had to keep fighting. The challenges he had faced, his family's financial struggles in his youth, to his consistent heart issues, and the failed merger had put his resilience to the test. However, instead of being disheartened, he found them uplifting. Each setback fueled his determination to triumph. Rising from adversity, he relished the opportunity to outmaneuver his opponents. The Boston partners had no idea what hit them. Jack Bogle went in the next day after his firing with one last ace up his sleeve. He argued for himself and raised the question of why the funds were not working as well as they thought they would. The directors listened, and he knew that in the end, they would want to retain at least a part of him. And in the end, Jack Bogle would not remain out of a job. Instead, he convinced the independent board to keep him on to run the funds. Bogle believed restructuring the fund's relationship with Wellington could benefit shareholders, proposing various options to untangle their connection. However, achieving unanimous support for his mutualization proposal seemed unlikely due to the opposition from Wellington. At a fund board meeting, Bogle emphasized the importance of independence for the funds, outlining several options for the restructuring of their relationship with Wellington. On Friday, August 1st, 1974, while driving with his son, Bogle received news that the fund directors were debating whether to keep the Wellington name. As Bogle wanted to separate himself from the Wellington Company, he searched a new name for the fund. Bogle stumbled upon Vanguard while browsing through a book about Admiral Nelson's victories. Feeling it symbolized leadership and progress, he chose it for the new collective identifier for the funds. Forming the Vanguard Group Incorporated, Bogle aimed to centralize administrative tasks and ensure fair treatment of the fund shareholders. Despite facing challenges, including internalizing administrative functions, Bogle remained determined to establish Vanguard as a beacon of integrity in the mutual fund industry. He envisioned Vanguard as a testament to shareholder-centric principles, seeking to transform the industry's ethos through his crusades for fairness. He needed to find a solution for Vanguard to assume the investment management and the distribution of the funds. Having conducted research on the index fund during his senior thesis at Princeton, he was familiar with their potential and he recognized an opportunity. Presenting the idea to the board, they initially expressed skepticism, stating that Vanguard couldn't enter investment management. However, he clarified that the proposed fund would not require no active management. Persuaded by this argument, the board agreed, marking the beginning of the index revolution. Subsequently, he realized the necessity of discontinuing Wellington and its sales force in distributing the fund. Overnight, all sales commissions were eliminated, transitioning to a no-load model. Again, met with resistance from the directors who opposed Vanguard's assumption of the distribution, but he had clarified that they were not taking over, but rather eliminating it entirely. And once again, the board approved the decision.
And along the way, I restructured all by myself the Wellington Fund. And in 1978, got rid of all the crazy go-go growth that these managers had put in it, and shifted from a growth emphasis to an income emphasis in 1978. And it has been one of the top performing balanced funds ever since, and it's hard to believe that's almost 40 years ago now.
This decision propelled John Bogle to become a titan in the history of investment management, as he managed to create one of the largest investment management firms in the world today. Despite everything thrown his way, Jack Bogle had his eye on the prize and won. On January 16, 2019, John C. Bogle would pass away from esophageal cancer at the age of 89. He leaves behind a legacy and a life to be remembered, and he transformed the financial industry so that the average American could be a winner from their investments. He inspired and continues to inspire people, and he truly was one in a million.
There's I believe that he's made it today, and that is Jack Bogle, who I talked about in the annual report. Jack Bogle has probably done more for the American investor than any man in the country. Jack, could you stand up? There he is.